Assalamu alaikum. How are you doing today? Is the world becoming more polarized or people becoming more polarized? One of the advantages of being old is that you can compare previous decades to where we are today. I'm 61, I'm turning 62 this year, so I've got quite a number of years to look back on. Although I try not to look back too much, because then you're really old when you only start reminiscing. We need to be look we need to be looking forward all the time. But by polarized I mean opposites. In today's world, everybody has their own opinion. There is so much information available on social media. Everyone has a cell phone. So everyone looks things up for themselves and they have their own opinion on everything. So this whole atomic structure, it's taking off, if you like. People prefer being on their own and people prefer being with their cell phones. So you'll find that society is polarizing. It's becoming one extreme to the other extreme. Now, I'm a Muslim, and we Muslims are becoming a lot more polarized than we were before. Here in South Africa, we were always a close knit community united against apartheid. In fact, there was even a political organization called the United Democratic Front, the biggest anti apartheid movement in South Africa. And there were a lot of people of all races in the UDF. Today, those very same people, after almost 30 years of no more apartheid, they've, we've drifted apart. And things are divided along racial lines, and within that, things are divided along religious lines. So, if you had to ask me, I would say, in a nutshell, that things are a lot more polarized than they were before. Obviously, getting old has got a lot to do with it, but I teach the same classes every year, and they the same age, and I can notice that there's a lot more differences of opinion, and ideas and notions about different things are poles apart. So, polarized. In terms of religion, it's more like Islam and nothing. There's no real Christianity. Yes, there are a lot of Christian people around, but before when I was young, everyone was Christian. Literally everyone was Christian. They went to church. They didn't. There wasn't atheist and agnostic and all those things. And I'm talking about when I was a teenager. People were attached to their church or to their mosque. They went there and they spoke about it like it's a normal thing. And obviously, there were the naughty ones. Um, the Muslim ones were naughty, but they went to mosque because everybody went to the mosque. But there were the Christian friends. We lived in the same street. And there was that one or two that didn't go. But they didn't consider themselves not Christian. In today's world, there are a lot of Christian people. In fact, where I live right now, I can think of three churches that got sold, and they are now masjids. They sold it to the Muslim community. There's one huge old stone church, a beautiful, massive church that the Turkish community bought a few years back, and they turned it into a masjid. It's called Jummah Masjid. And they also opened on a Friday. Jummah was their first walk that they had, and they were packed to the ceiling. Just by the way, they invited the Imam of Masjid al Quds, but of course, you know who didn't want to let him leave. And so they had, if I remember correctly, it was the Imam of a masjid in Egypt. Um, and then there's one near to where my son lives, and then there's one here near to where I live. Was formerly a church, and now it's a thriving masjid complex with madrasa and community hall and the works. So, in terms of polarization, today you have Muslim and non-Muslim. And when we were young, Muslim and Christian, everybody used to do everything together, not just the children, everybody, the adults as well. People used to go in and out of one another's houses without any thought. Today, people don't just walk in and out of one another's houses. In fact, people don't visit as often as they used to before. Everybody. And just that one fact is not, that's not a progress. We talk about a progressive society. But the one thing about a progressive society is how polarized everyone is becoming. We are moving apart from one another. Now, how can that be progress? It's easier to commit crimes against one another if we don't know one another. And crime is soaring here in South Africa. And the one thing about Western society with all their research, they don't do research in terms of social impacts. There's no, there's no statistics, there's no conclusions that can be withdrawn based on the amount of violence on television or in movies, for example, because they don't want to see that as negative. There's no statistics based on free sexual activity. You can find something like the number of AIDS cases, yes, but that's the medical field that has to do that kind of thing. But then it's kept under wraps. You have to go and search for it. It's not as if it's used as a let's say a AIDS epidemic local to South Africa. And yet we have over 8 million AIDS cases in South Africa in a population of 50 million. But it's not looked at, it's ignored. To come back to polarization, it's 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 most felt when family units find themselves to be polarized, and that is that they are on one extreme of a spectrum, and they find other members of their family are on another extreme of the same spectrum. And of course, there are a lot of spectra. So families or family members finding themselves on different extremes of the same spectrum, it's quite easy that something like that would happen. And so you'll find polarization within a family. And in some cases, the polarization is so bad that family members don't actually see one another. So, how is that progress? How is that moving forward? We are more wealthy than we were before, but that just enables us to move further away from one another. And so you get polarization in terms of distance, if there is such a thing. So you'll find yourself further and further away, even in another province or even in another country. And these things never happened in the 1980s or even in the 1970s when I was a teenager. We moved between Cape Town and Durban, two different provinces, yes. But then, even then, there weren't that many of us that moved like that. everybody was in one area and close to one another also. So maybe in one sense, I might be longing for the good old days, but there are definitely things in society nowadays where there is a lot of polarization, where people exist on opposite ends of the spectrum, and where we, as Muslims, are finding it difficult to be in one another's company and to even talk to one another. It's because we exist on different spectra, and we're not supposed to. But there are spectra within Islam where we can be on opposite end. Take a simple thing like rich and poor. Both are allowed in Islam. Both are encouraged in Islam, although being poor is a little more, I won't say encouraged, but it's a bit more beneficial being poor than it is being rich. But neither are a problem. And in Islam, you find rich people and poor people. And that's the first polarizing spectrum that comes to mind, where people are on opposite ends of a wealth scale. And that's something that is happening a lot more in the sense that everyone was poor back in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and even in the 90s. Yes, there were a handful of rich people in the Muslim community, but the overwhelming 99% were poor. But we didn't know we were poor. My father, for example, owned his own house. So did his sister next door and the other family next door, also his sister. But it was plain and simple semi detached houses. And the important thing is, we didn't know we were poor. The whole concept of poor only came about when more people became rich, like today. Today, people own big houses and they drive fancy cars, and so the ones who don't are considered poor. But previously, everybody didn't. So technically, everybody was poor. And the one thing that young people today agree on is that their parents were poor. I'm talking about, when I say young people, I mean people my age, because we were the first ones who had the opportunity to become enfranchised, to become wealthier than our parents. So my children consider their grandparents to be poor because they grew up with me and I was relatively well off. So is that a good thing? Think about it. Salaam alaikum.